Well, welcome so much. Thank you for coming and joining us for the session. You are at Getting Schooled by Digital Natives. Before we get started, we want to get to know who's in the room. So raise your hand if you're currently a teacher. Great. Raise your hand if you are an administrator. Okay. Raise your hand if you work in higher ed. Okay, K-12. Great. And raise your hand if you're a service provider to schools. Great. And if you make decisions about ed tech products. Sweet. Well, I think we're going to have a pretty fun 2 hours here. Thanks for coming. We hope we give you some valuable insight about digital natives and the tools that they use.
All right. So just to kick us off, we did a little throwback to The Simpsons. I'm going to watch this video, see if it feels familiar.
Okay, Edna, remember, if you can teach one kid one thing, then today will be a success.
Oh, Edna. So we're showing you this because, also this video is funny, so wait for it, wait for it. So we're showing you Edna because we're here to talk a little bit about digital natives, but we're not here to talk about technology. Actually, we're here to talk about the way that technology is reshaping the way these students engage with the world. So this shocking statistic states that students spend more than 8 hours a day on media, and that is in addition to their time at school. I'm not sure when they're finding time for this, but that's a pretty wild fact. And we can kind of argue about whether or not that's good for them, but it's happening. And what does that mean? So it means that technology shapes behavior, right? If you interact with technology every day, you know, in like the rare occasions that you have to get in a taxi cab instead of a Lyft, that you might like mistakenly try to leave without paying, right? Technologies really sort of set your expectations for what a good experience feels like. And for students, technology, and for this younger generation, technology is setting their expectations for not just how they engage with technology, but for how they engage and show up in everything, right? These students have so much autonomy and voice when they're in their mobile platforms, but what does that mean for how they show up in the classroom or in college or in the world in general? Oops. All right, so we're here to talk a little bit about how we might engage students in learning with this sort of sense that these digital mindsets have really shifted how students engage. And so what does that mean for what that can teach us about how we design and solve some of the challenges around engagement we're having? So we are going to ask that if you're sitting in the back, at the very least, you've grabbed a set of worksheets, because what you have in front of you, and we will also be asking you to at least pair up, if not team up with 3 people. So if you're not sitting next to anyone now, you might want to find a partner. We're not going to jump into the workshop part right away, but what you've got in front of you is a design toolkit. So we are, and Caryn's going to explain in a minute a little bit more about who we are, but we're designers. There's a little secret about designers, which is we see challenges like the one Edna is facing in her classroom as opportunities. We're like professional optimists. And so we're always looking for those challenges and saying, how can we then translate those to opportunities to think creatively about how we might tackle a problem. And so what you have in front of you is a UX design toolkit. We're going to teach you today how to take a bunch of really fun insights about how digital natives are showing up and translate that to tackling challenges that you're facing in your classrooms, in your institutions, or even as you're designing an educational technology product. So, for those who aren't familiar with the term UX, what is UX design? UX design is a pretty basic principle, right? UX design is, this is design, by the way. UX design means that your users show up to any experience they engage with a set of expectations. And then when when they engage, that experience is either going to meet, exceed, or actually like completely blow their expectations, right? And so it's sort of like that tension between them when the expectations don't meet the reality of what happens. That is a design friction. You could call bad design. We can usually spot the moments. All of us are really good at spotting the moments where bad design happens. And like this, for an example, super, super basic, right? But that little plate on the door is a design gesture that's telling you this is where you press to open the door. Now, UX design, if you really want to sort of like this point of like expectation setting, if you really want to mess with people, change that plate to the other side of the door and then see what happens, right? And in essence, when we're sort of bumping up against friction with students, the plate is on the other side of the door. And so how do we understand who we're designing for? How do we gain empathy for them so that we can really create a seamless experience where we're engaging students at their best, we're able to bring our best to the classroom as well. So UX design is a mindset. While we are all professional designers, that doesn't mean that design is a skill set that's owned simply by designers. You don't have to be professionals. It's actually a mindset that if you just bring this lens of empathy and a bias to action to any challenge you face, you can actually start unlocking a whole new world of opportunities for problem solving. So, without further ado, we should probably introduce ourselves. I'm Heather. I lead the Design for Learning studio at IDEO, and I'm a designer by training.
And I'm Isabela. I lead design and development of EdTech platforms in our Design for Learning studio.
And I'm Caryn, Voskuil, and I also work in our education studio. I'm a former educator, and I build partnerships for our studio at large.
All right, so Caryn's gonna share a little quick snippet about who IDEO is. Who in the room is familiar with IDEO before we jump in? All right, so this will be quick. So most folks are familiar with IDEO, but maybe a little less familiar with our work in education. So we want to give you a sense of what we've been up to lately in education, and then we're going to share a little story that is going to bring some of these digital native mindsets to life, and it will be fun.
We promise. Beautiful. So we are a design and innovation consulting firm, and we create impact through design. And one of the things that really works to our advantage is we have 9 offices around the world. So we bring this global perspective to our work. And what that gives us is a lot of diversity of thought and empathy, perhaps, from other cultures, and the ability to look at a problem from many different lenses. We also have an interdisciplinary approach. So one of the sort of secrets for all of our teams is we build our teams with a whole bunch of different skill sets. So myself, as a former teacher, we build teams with folks that are systems designers, communications designers, business designers, and sort of everything in between. But all of our forces combined make up the magic of a collaborative team. You might have heard of us probably because we started out designing the very first mouse for Apple. And as IDEO has grown from that about 30 years ago, our work has started to span across almost every single sector. So from products into services, into experiences, and into much less tangible things like we're going to discuss today. Things like student experiences, systems, culture in schools, and everything in between. And all of the things that you might intentionally or unintentionally design. And we do all of these things using a method we call design thinking. And design thinking at its core is really a human-centered approach to problem solving. So when we're looking at solving a problem, you want to often start with like, what's viable, what is feasible, what are the possible things that we could do to solve this problem using those constraints. And what we like to do is always think about the person or the human that we're designing for and start there. So figure out what is the most desirable or what is the need that we're trying to solve for the person. And how might that sort of spark insights that will lead to innovation in the other areas as well. And the process itself, as I'm sure many of you have practiced, it's very iterative and it's cyclical. And it starts with exploring and then going into synthesis, testing and prototyping our ideas, and going around and around and around again. It is not a linear process. It's a cyclical process. It can feel uncomfortable, and it can feel pretty ambiguous at times. And the ability to be a designer is this mindset, this orientation to the world to believe that it's possible, that there's an optimistic way to figure out what a possible solution to the problem could be. So this is now our Design for Learning studio. Has 30 people in it, and we all sit in our San Francisco office, and we sort of believe in harnessing the learner in every single person and the transformative value of learning for individuals. And we design across every sector. We design for students, for teachers, for administrators, for folks that maybe make decisions about policy, for governments, for sort of everyone that this system touches, including our families and our communities and the folks that we serve. And this is a little bit of our breadth. So our Design for Learning studio, or this education practice, we have been doing work in education for over a decade. But in the last 3 years, we've really gotten to do some more complex system challenges. And these are the types of questions that we're answering in our studio right now, like in the last year. How might we help high school students gain access to high-quality career pathways across the state of California? How might we transform career colleges into a model for student success? How might we reimagine the juvenile incarceration experience to support a sustainable transition back into society? Even down to how might we prepare our students to use their voice to address civic issues that matter most to them? We did that one right around the election last year. So we have a tremendous amount of breadth. We're working across, we're working across schools. We're working across the prison system. We're working across individual schools and domestic and internationally. So we have a very wide range of projects, and that's one of the things that gives us a ton of inspiration and learning to bring back to every new project that we might start. So I wanted to tell you just 3 quick stories so you get a sense for what the types of work that we might be taking on. This first one is how might we help youth in Brazil develop basic literacy skills? So what happened is we were asked by a foundation and the government in Brazil to design an early literacy app for students aged about 3 to 6 years old. And they came to us and they said, what's kind of the best tool that we can put in front of our earliest learners to help them develop basic literacy? And how might that tool be smart? How might it be engaging for students? And how might teachers feel like they're also in control of the experience that we're giving students in the classroom? And we ended up building an app with the Lemon Foundation called Getopolis. Another one is one that you're going to learn much more about in detail through trial and error in this next part of our session. But it's about how might we use technology to scale the impact of a high-touch coaching model. Has anyone in here heard of the organization called Beyond 12? Great. So Beyond 12 is a nonprofit that serves primarily first-generation college goers. And their mission is to partner with students and universities that take in first-generation college goers and get them sort of to and through college by filling in some of the most critical information and needs that this particular very specific group of students needs in order to be successful. And what we ended up designing was an app called My Coach. And lastly, we presented a little bit on this on Monday here as well, but how might we create a school system that is affordable, scalable, and excellent? So we designed an entire school system from the ground up in Peru to serve the middle class. So in Peru, actually, they have very poor quality public schools, and they had very expensive private schools, and there wasn't anything developing the families in the middle class. And so Innova came to us and asked us to design alongside of them this holistic model that would work, all the parts working together to create something that is an affordable option for families under about $130 per month that is scalable. They've now grown to 41 schools across Peru and are getting ready to expand into other Latin American countries. And also delivers a very rigorous academic experience on par with the best private schools in the country. And with that, we're going to transition into designing for digital natives.
All right. So just before we get started on working through the UX Designer Toolkit that you have in front of you, I just want to tell you a story of how do you go from, so here, for example, here are some of the strategies. If we start with empathy, we really learn about who our user is and what really matters to them. And then we start designing and prototyping and testing things until we get to a design that we are all happy with. We're going to do it together. You have the toolkit in front of you. If you don't have it, these tables in the front have some, and we can distribute later. But what I wanted to do now is walk you through a story of how, in the example of Beyond 12, how we went from understanding who our users were till a final design of the app My Coach. So Beyond 12, as Caryn mentioned, is an organization that helps first-generation college students get through college. And they employ several coaches that are on a regular basis in touch with the students and helping them answer questions from like mundane questions like how do I apply for FAFSA, how do I register for classes, all the way to bigger, really important questions like is college for me, what am I doing here? So we were creating an app. They asked us our help to create an app so they could make that level of support available to thousands of students, not just the students that they were serving at the time through this one-on-one coaching. The problem is we were trying to teach these college skills to students that were about this is what you need to do to prepare yourself to register for classes. You should think about building a budget. Here's how you deal with the money and make sure your ends meet through the end of the month. That was, and the problem is this is a lot less engaging than, for example, chatting with your friends or playing games or being checking your stories on Snapchat. So really what the core of the question and the design challenge that we had was how do we keep students engaged? And we knew from the beginning that we would be competing with mainstream apps. This was going to be an app that wasn't going to be like taking the time of other educational apps or supporting apps, but really, the messengers, the Snapchats, or all the like WhatsApp, or these like really big mainstream apps that are around there. So we went on a mission to really study what are they using, why, what attracts them to these apps. So really unpack what were they doing really well, so we could learn from it. In the process, we came across some like obscure apps, like Micmac. This one on the front is like QVC for young folks, and you can buy all sorts of like random, like questionably useful things. And also Twitch, you probably heard about it. It's picking up steam so much so that Amazon bought it, and kids use them. It's used primarily for teaching your game skills, but it can be used for teaching any skills. And me as a student, I can be a teacher also. So that was really interesting too, all the way to the more expected stuff like Facebook Messenger, the stuff that we heard of before. But really, the one thing that every student had on their homepage, no matter who you are, no matter who you live, no matter what kind of like circumstances you're in, the app that every student had was Snapchat. And we all heard of Snapchat. We kind of like sort of familiar with it. Some of us in our team had downloaded it before, but none of us were really users. So we were like, let's really, download and see what this is all about. Why is it so relevant? So that's what we did. And it was funny, we were in a project space and sitting in our chairs and like, what is it? How come the first thing that I see when I open this thing is my niece? What is going on? How do I navigate? Where are the buttons? And really the reaction was, WTF? How is this possible? Because as designers, classically trained designers, if I can say that, That's the one question that we don't want our user to think about, like in the first time that they open your app, but clearly that didn't matter. So it wasn't an issue. So we were so intrigued. We were like, let's get to the bottom of this thing. Why is it so, what about it like is really resonating with the students? Just for context, around that same time in the process, we were like, there's something about video. There's something really human and engaging about videos. Can we use these videos to communicate the tasks that I mentioned earlier? Like, can we use videos to teach kids how do you create a budget for yourself? How do you apply for FAFSA? How do you register for classes? Can we use that in our app? So we were like, okay, let's give it a try. That's what we do. We just like try things out without, like just so we can learn. So what we did, we handpicked one of the coolest designers that we have in our office. She has an amazing energy, like really great. And we wrote a script that we're really excited about and peppered with a lot of funny things. And we directed her, like we filmed her using Snapchat because of all the filters and all the stuff that you can do. So this is what we created.
Hey guys, it's Coach Andrea. I'm really happy that you guys are here. Oh yeah. Let's talk about college. I know it could be a little bit overwhelming, but I have 6 great tips to help you get oriented to your college campus and the resources available to you.
So anyway, as you can see, we kind of cheated a little bit. We like edited with professional software. We added some flares, some sped things up, and some sound effects. And we rolled that into our first prototype of the app. And we're like, let's see what happens. And this was the reaction. Needless to say, we were so crushed. We had put so much effort into this thing, and it bombed like really bad. It was not good. It was kind of like one of the lowest moments in our project space. But we were like, okay, like it doesn't die here. We just have to keep trying. So we continued prototyping. That's what we did. So we knew that that first super produced, highly scripted video that we created, we were trying too hard. We were like, trying really too hard to like sound, we're listen to me. I'm just as cool as you. So anyway. So we were like, we were thinking about let's get sort of a celebrity Snapchatter, give her a script, and have her do her thing. So this is it.
Oh, what's up, friends? I was just making dank memes on the web. Hey, does now seem like a good time to file your FAFSA, or what?
It sounds like a giant pain in the hoo-ha, but it'll do nothing but save you money. Follow these 5 simple steps, and you're done.
Step 1.
Anyway, too over the top. Especially financial aid, super sensitive, and we blew it again. Did not work, did not fall so well, but it was still better than Andrea. So this Snapchatter, she was really good with this video selfie, and she made these 3-minute videos seem super dynamic, but the tone was really off, and it was too over the top. So then we were like, let's try the coaches themselves. Let's invite them and give them a few things that they should talk about. They could be talking about, and let them do their thing, so we can really be more authentic.
Nikki, you talking, but we recording.
But can I tell you what else they need to know?
What else they need to know?
They need to know what website to go to.
What's the website?
To find
So here's what you need to do. You need to
download the education plan.
Woo!
Anyway, too distracting. While they were really, the students that we showed it to, they were like, oh, that's my coach. Or like, oh, they feel like regular people because the coaches that Beyond 12 hire, they're essentially peers. They're first-generation college students that just recently graduated. So we felt a lot more natural and a bit more authentic, but the message got lost and it was too distracting, and I don't know what I'm taking from this. And so that's a design process. You just try until until something works. So we were like, okay, let's try another celebrity Snapchatter. So we invited this guy called Shaq. And at that point, we were like, you know what? Like, here's 3 bullet points. Here's the theme. Like, talk about registering for classes. Make sure you mention these 3 things, and just do your thing. Like, really, stop. Let's let go of control a little bit. Just do your thing. And this is what we got back.
Hey, have you signed up for classes yet? If you haven't, it's probably because signing up for classes sucks. There's a ton of choices, and it feels like each choice influences your career goals, your life path, your eternal fate, and it's just a treacherous obstacle course of emotions. Do you already know what you're going to take? Or do you feel like a wandering beacon of uncertainty traversing a perilous hellscape? Either way, I got 3 hot tips for you. Number 1, look at all the credits that you need to take or transfer in order to get done with your major on time. Priority number 1 is graduating on time. Number 2, meet with your advisor. Don't be scared, get over it. These guys are experts. Their whole job is talking to lost bozos like you all day. Get schooled by a pro. Drop them a line. This is the last hot tip.
I mean, he even called them bozos, but that really worked. That was like high moment in the project. We were like, okay, there's something like here that he's doing really well. But the funny thing is that when I first received it, and I'm like, oh, well, he could have picked a better background, couldn't he? Like the light, not quite well. It didn't matter. So the thing that we learned here is that if you have a personality to back it up, the production value really doesn't matter. But what was interesting that he was doing is that he was not trying to talk like them. He wasn't using their slangs. He was just being himself. But at the same time that he was just being himself, he was really connecting to the students on like, dude, I know what it feels like to be registering for classes, and it does feel like a wandering beacon of uncertainty traversing a hellscape. Like, I get you, I've been there, but listen to me. And he was authoritative, but he kind of balanced it out with humor. But ultimately, he left students with a really crisp to do, essentially. Like, here's what you need to know, like 1, 2, 3 steps, go with it. So that was working really well. So we're like, okay, lesson learned. Now we know that the video is working, but we're not done. We're not recreating Snapchat. We're still creating a supporting app that supports kids through college. So there was a lot more work to do, but we learned a lot from that video. But the work had to continue, and what I want to share with you right now is as we created the experience of the app, so the video was just one part of it. So as we expanded and created everything, there was these 5 mindsets that we learned along the way. So I'm going to share them with you, and they're also on the small cards on your desks, and you might want to refer to it later when we get when we get more hands-on. All right, mindset number 1: swipe, swipe, tap. It was funny because when we rolled that really bad first video into the app, we also had we had a prototype of an app that wasn't really fleshed out. It was really unbaked. Like the navigation wasn't quite there, but we were let's it's better to test sooner than later. So we were just showing it to students as we were building things up. And we put it in the hands of the students, and they were like, swipe, swipe, scroll here, tap there. And it didn't matter that there wasn't precise, structure or architecture or navigation or button, because they just knew what to do. It really didn't matter for them. So we're like, okay, we weren't expecting that, but let's take that as a lesson. So in the app that we created, you have the center, here in the center, the main feature of the app is this long feed of video tasks, so to speak. And if you're I'm not in the mood for videos right now, just tell me what I need to do next. All you need to do is swipe to the left, and you get access to the right over there, a list, a really pared back list of things that you need to do. Keep in mind, if you remember one thing, there's a deadline in 2 weeks that you should be on your radar. And if you just want to get a sense of maybe edit my profile or get a sense of how am I doing on in the bigger categories, you swipe all the way to the other side, you have your profile. But really at the bottom of this is what we really have to take as a lesson is that you're putting them in the driver's seat. So no matter if you're looking to kill time and look through the feed, or you just want to know, am I on top of things, am I missing anything, and you want to look through your priorities and your to-do list, there's something here for you. So ultimately, you're in control. And that's really important when we're designing and we're creating an experience that put the student in the driver's seat. Mindset number 2, all the feels. So you and I are probably very comfortable communicating everything that we need through text. But if you look at the students' communications, if they ever allow you to look at their chat, it's all a mix of it's text, it's emojis, meme, it's video, it's image, and they're so fluid in this language of everything all at once. That sometimes it makes you wonder, like, are you just being lazy? Are you never going to learn how to write properly? But what we forget is that there's so much more that they're communicating in such a in a lot more concise way, that there's something that we should learn from that in this new language of everything all together. So the way it came up in our app is that one of the things that we were thinking about is, okay, so you've done one of the video tasks, you completed. How do we say, like, you're done, great job? Do we just say good job? Do you say good boy? Or do you give them badges? We really considered badges for a while, but it was so lame. The problem is, like, when we give them badges, okay, it's visual, but it doesn't have a cultural meaning. It doesn't have any meaning for them. We're creating the meaning. So we were like, okay, let's give them what they really care about, which is GIF. Who doesn't, like, it's funny because GIF is like, what about GIF is so interesting because, but it's the same of asking, like, why do you like, cats are into laser pointer? I don't know, but it's really like, we're really into it. So, and that works really well instead of like giving them lame badges. So the lesson here for us is speak to all parts of their brain. So just really, like think about what we heard Shaq, that last video that I mentioned, and he's saying, he's being very very expressive, and he's talking in this very visual language, like the wandering beacon of uncertainty. Is like you can picture that. So and it conveys so much more than just like giving you a simple point in words only. So it's really important to speak to all parts of their brain and speak to the emotional side of it as well. Mindset number 3, like, repost, comment, share. I'm talking about all the social stuff, and I promise you I'm not gonna spend too long here or try to convince you of the importance of social, but the thing is, social became a thing 10 years ago on the web, right? Like with the early stages of Facebook and that whole story. And after that, people went wild, how social is really important now. Nobody talks about it, and that's because it's not less important, but because social has evolved. And social, before it was almost like, but essentially social now is a means to an end. It's not, it's not the main feature, but it doesn't mean that it's not important. So in thinking about what is this new version of social and how it played into the app that created, we were thinking, how do we, where's the right spot to have like social interaction in this app? And we realized that it has to be contextual. So in this video, when you get into a video tasks, we created a section there on the right where you can see what other students are talking about, because a lot of these to-dos from college, a lot of them are seasonal, so registering for classes, most likely a lot of students are going to be doing that at the same time. So here is a place. So I'm not talking about me, you're not talking about you, but we are both talking about this thing that we're interested in, and we can ask questions. We, like, maybe someone else knows what I'm, is in a similar situation and can help me out. It's also a place so that coaches can jump in and answer questions as well. But not every question that a student might have is related to a topic from this to-do list, to-do item. So we also created ways for, like, the app essentially became a gateway for them to reach out to a real coach. So there was a very simple way that you can, like, forget all of this. I have a very specific question that is very unique to me. No problem, I can do very easily on the phone, and then also for a coach to reach out to the students through the app as well. So we were very deliberate about how we're using social. And the lesson here, how can we make learning social? And it's, and not because it's just expected, but it's also a really powerful motivator. And then we just have to think about if they expect it, how does it show up in what I am designing and something that helps solve my challenge. By Kanye. Number 4, YOLO. Okay, YOLO is also a little bit old. 5 years ago it came up, and at first it had this meaning of like everything has to be exhilarating and wild and a very brand new experience. But I think YOLO is still, or you only live once, is still relevant because we have to think about ways of keeping things fresh. So how it showed up in our experience, we had a joke in our project space that let's not give these students dog food every day. Like how we can make it really fresh and interesting. So we had our feed, and instead of just having these video tasks, we were thinking about what are other things that would really add to this feed experience that would make it really interesting for students, that give them an excuse for them to open the app and see what's going on. So we created these quizzes like that first one of like, how are you doing? Sad Kanye, happy Kanye, angry Kanye, or even like inviting artists and illustrators to sketch a postcard, or even maybe like an inspirational quote. So we added a lot of extra things that would give them a reason to keep coming back to the app. And the lesson for us here is how do we keep it fresh? How do we, again, keep giving the student an excuse to come back and learn something new? Also because like neuroscience says that you're learning by making new connections. So how do we introduce new things with the things that we need to learn and then hit their interests so they're open to absorb even more? And lastly, TLDR, too long didn't read. We were very conscious that we were trying to teach them so much. There was so much stuff that we wanted to make sure that they got it, but it was important for them to get it at the right time, to be relevant. So we were very conscious not to overwhelm the students with a lot of like a sea of information all at once. So what we had to do is think about what is the squinting layer of this content? If the students, at the end of the day, we're talking about like really important information that they need to know to get through college. But at the end of the day, some of the things are going to be more important to some students, some of the things are going to be more important to others. So we had to design ways for them to be able to skim and quickly recognize what is important to them and not. So we created these icons that allow you to see, like, if it's red, it's probably more urgent, it's coming up, it's something that you should know about. And then also, it was really easy to swipe and dismiss a task that, I don't want it to show again, like it's not relevant to me, I can skip it. So the lesson that I think we should take here is how do we take a UX stance to learning? And that's because we have to think about not just like how do we design the content that we need to convey, but also how do we design the experience of this content? How do we allow students to really like navigate in a non-linear way, like and really explore, but also dive deeper into the things that really attract them or that is really relevant to them. So I've been talking a lot. Here's like a summary of all these principles, and you have on your tables there, you have a card with you. My provocation to you is, if these are the principles that made sense for us, and we definitely want you to be inspired by them, I also want you to think about your design challenges and think about what are the principles that are, like, come up with your own principles of what is really relevant for the things that you're designing. So, and we're going to get a head start on that today. So that's what we're going to do. Let's get our hands dirty and start thinking about how we may engage students in the learning relevant to the things that we do.
All right, so we'll shift gears a little bit. We have just under an hour. I'll introduce that activity, then we can kind of turn the lights on. Maybe just a quick heads up, everyone will need to be in pairs for this next activity. This will be a little bit hands-on, a chance for you to practice some of the principles and methods that you just saw illustrated. So the first most important mindset for design is empathy, right? As Caryn mentioned, the design thinking process, or any design process really starts with a deep understanding of who your user is and what their needs are. And one trick you're gonna walk away with in your pocket today is something that we as UX designers do a lot, which is create personas. So, you know, as our process unfolds, inevitably we'll go out into the field, and we use kind of a techniques like an anthropologist might, where we observe students in context. We might do a variety of activities, even some early prototyping, have conversations that go kind of broad and deep, and that'll teach us a lot, and we'll start to see themes and patterns amongst the students that we've met. And one thing we end up doing with those themes and patterns, you know, one thing is we design principles like Isabela just shared. The other thing we might do is think about personas. So personas are a way to kind of capture the different needs of your students, or maybe the different modes or behaviors or mindsets of your students in a way that they're sticky and they can keep with you through the design process. So, you know, sometimes you might even give them a name, kind of give them a description, and the idea here is they not only inspire design at the start of the process, but as you're kind of designing all the way through the process, you're constantly using these personas as a litmus test. Would, you know, this feature, or would this like new way that I'm thinking about teaching a lesson work for Billy, right? So we want you to get your digital native empathy on. This is your chance. We have identified a handful of digital natives. These are definitely extremes, but hopefully some of their behaviors will look familiar to you if you all engage with digital natives in your world, be it in your classrooms or even if you're home, if any of you have children. What we want you to do is actually pull out your phones or your computers or your tablets and pick. We're gonna have you pair up. You can either do it in teams of 2 or 3, but we want you to pick 2 or 3 of these different, you know, be it YouTube, Instagram, or Snapchat, digital natives, and we're gonna give you about 15 minutes to do a variety of activities. So the first activity is you're gonna pull out your persona worksheet, and we want you to really understand these digital natives and their mindsets, right? We already gave you a little bit of a head start, but we want you to look at these different personas in a new lens. See if you can learn something different about them by just sort of exploring their feeds. And we're gonna start with just some like general observations, like what's surprising, what feels new, what are you observing about how they show up in the world, or what's important to them. What are some general observations? And then we'll talk about those, and then we'll keep going.
Okay, we're gonna bring it back in. I'm super curious. What were some of your general observations? Let's hear it. What are some general observations? Maybe tell us what platform you looked at, maybe who you looked at, and what did you observe? Yes?
For example, the Prince Sarma, was it?
Yeah?
Instagram, so he had kind of wanted to show the freedom of and inner peace. So you could find out that he's after like clean images. There's a lot of air, so that tells about freedom, and he wants to express the freedom. Also, I thought that he might do some yoga, and later on I saw that he was meditating in the middle of the road, and like really a lot about aesthetics. So really clean images, and so these are the takeouts. Do you want to add?
Sure. Yeah, and then we also looked at, hold on one second, let me pull it up. Brett Manrock.
Okay.
Yeah, and so his way of communicating was just like super, it was like super emotional and emotive, and like he used the format, so it was on Instagram, and he would use like the format of the short story to like kind of like set you up sometimes, and then at the very end like tell you something totally different. He was really honest, and like not embarrassed to be sort of himself or vulnerable. You know, it's kind of like that very like.
I saw some other people looked at him too. Who looked at Brett? Yeah, what did you think of his videos? I think they can hear. Yeah. Oh, okay.
Thank you. We had authentic, a lot of like exploration, expressiveness, very creative, artistic. We thought like across, scrappy, like the polished thing, you know, especially with that video, like his videos and whatnot. It was just kind of whatever props were around and the footage and whatnot was just kind of spliced together. It wasn't anything like well edited, but it was very like authentic.
Great. If you didn't jot any of these things down, you can steal from others, but we're filling in the first box on the worksheet right now. What else?
Oh, one more here.
We're making you run. So sorry.
I was going to say they were sort of playful and a little bit sort of self-deprecating in a way, sort of making themselves seem a little bit the brunt of a joke, a little bit.
Do you want to reflect a little bit on what it was like to use Snapchat?
I was watching my colleague use Snapchat. It's pretty daunting. I don't know. Carol, if you want to say anything.
I had Snapchat for a long time, but my kids cut me off, so I actually don't have many friends. It's the first time I'm trying to figure out what exactly is this besides the fun. So it's very challenging.
Yeah.
That's great.
Can I just build? Oh, sorry, one more. Go ahead.
Did you say? Oh, sorry. I thought you wanted to say something.
One theme that I'm hearing in a lot of your observations is actually vulnerability, which I think is really interesting because if you think about like how you can, like, I don't know, there's something surprising about how like teenagers are actually willing to be vulnerable. Like, does that not feel surprising? It feels surprising to me. And if you can tap into that vulnerability in the classroom, how might that actually more deeply connect students to experiences that they're having? So like these are kind of the things that we'll start to do is like once you start to see patterns, like what are the observations or themes that you start to see, and then what does that start to make you think in terms of how that might be useful as you're designing? So do you want to talk about the next?
Yeah. Did you have a question?
I do. So it's great that you bring up this vulnerability. As parents, we always, totally different generations, right? So even when I was designing apps and all that, I always think about it as a privacy, where to them, they don't think about it. And it's great that you change the lens and think about it as a vulnerability. Yeah.
That's what this whole process forces you to do is sort of shift your assumptions, right? Like, yeah.
Yeah, over here.
So how do you think about the sort of like duality of vulnerability, but also being highly curated and highly published, right? Because we were watching one YouTuber who basically was cutting back and forth with very herky-jerky, but you can't tell what was her editing out material, maybe that she didn't want the audience to see, versus what was stylistic.
Yeah.
Because this is being published and to some level monetized.
So maybe that's another theme. Like, what do you think? And so then a trick that we'll often do is also like ask why. Like the art of being a good design researcher is to kind of like ask why 5 times actually. Like when you're in a conversation and someone tells you, yeah, like I like to, maybe you're talking to that Snapchatter and you're like, can you tell me a little bit about your kind of process and why did you cut that? Like I noticed these cuts. Why do you do that? And then they might tell you, oh, like it's just like how Snapchat is. And then you're like, but why? And then you might keep asking why 5 times until you get to like that deeper layer, right? So we don't have the advantage of being able to talk to these students right now, but the next thing we're gonna have you do is actually exercise that kind of like why questioning so that you can start to understand what might be behind that and then use that for design. So actually maybe there's a tension between vulnerability or maybe there's another whole theme that we should be thinking about in terms of design.
And then just to comment on that, it's just looking in the media, just the material that the kids are putting out there, it's a bit imperfect, right? So you do want to be in touch with the students or the people that you're designing for. And so you have the opportunity to kind of dig deeper on things that are standing out for you.
Yeah, in the back.
Yeah, one more thing, because we've been talking about the emotion and like personality and stuff like that. I also think from an information standpoint, we looked at this YouTube video by this woman, Lacey something, I can't remember. But she discussed like sex issues. Yeah, so Lacey Green. And she basically like explained what popping a cherry is, and like made a little thing of like what a hymen is, and like did it all within 3 minutes. So it's like very quick, only relevant information, and like very direct. So even to your point of like too long, didn't read, it was just like to the point. Like, and so that's also another thing with all these videos is like they convey information like very efficiently and they're not verbose.
Yeah, that's and like in a very engaging way as well, right? Like, sort of, makes you sort of wonder like, oh, how do you flip that in kind of how we're introducing information to students?
Those were such great observations.
Yeah.
All right, so now what we're going to ask you to do is to continue working down the worksheet. So the very next thing we're asking you to do is actually flip this to think about a teenager that you might know. A person that represents a student mindset that is relevant to you. It could be a student in one of your schools. It could be a niece or nephew, a child of your own, or some student that you might work with or come across paths with. But this profile will help serve as your gut check for what we're going to be doing later on. So write down their name and write down how this person shows up in your world. And then we're going to ask you to keep going and start unpacking their motivations and their needs. So we're going to ask you to start, just like we just did, breaking down some things that we observe about the teenagers that we saw on social media. Start doing the same with the teenager that might show up in your life, and think about their values, their strengths, their challenges, and ways to get their attention or engagement.
How did that feel? Just like a quick gauge of, you don't have to like share exactly what you've learned, but how's this feeling? Does it feel like new? Does this feel like something you do all the time? Yeah. Oh, that's right, thank you.
I think it's good just to have the space to unpack, you know, so the people that we might be working, or sort of for us working on the behalf of these learners, it's good to just have the space to unpack and really think about it and dig more deeply.
Mm-hmm. That's great to hear. Any other kind of reflections on this activity?
So I keep thinking about or reflecting on sort of, it seems sort of daunting in terms of how to take kind of this currency of relevance to, you know, the folks who we were just looking at sort of their different online personas, and thinking about how to take things that are things they need to learn and kind of make it fit within that framework. I mean, the thing you guys presented as your example of this Beyond 12, it made sense of how to do it for this, but I'm thinking about sort of learning kind of across a broad range of contexts and issues and content and so on, and it's hard to think of how to translate this and then preserve the sort of things that you want people to learn. So just putting that out there.
No, I mean, there's a tension there, actually, and I think that's one of the reasons that we brought this content to this conference, frankly. Like, there's this tension, I think, in education where education's so best practices based, and it's such a rigorous, you know, it's such a rigorous discipline, and it's all about making sure that students have everything they need, and so there's a sense of urgency, but sometimes we forget to kind of look at it through the student eyes and say, like, what does the student need to actually, like, interface with this content? And I just want, like, one reflection and just kind of going around that I saw was, it can also be like really tempting to, like, when we start thinking about students' needs, to like frame the need as a solution, right? Like, oh, like, you know, like, and start using kind of all the best practices, like, oh, students need the like relevance to their life, right? Or students need mentorship. That's why they're challenged in this particular area, and it's great that you have those. And there's something to say at this stage in the process in particular, not to lead with a solution, right? Like, to like give yourself the space to like not lead with that solution, because if you really take a minute to unpack what it is the student needs, that will become the jumping off point for potentially whole new ways to unlock like different ways to approach those needs, right? You might get to places that you'd never imagined, and so I completely empathize. It's hard to make that
that bridge or translation. I hope that's actually what we're about to do next, is we're about to sort of share with you how you then take this need and turn it into a solution. So hopefully you'll get a chance to practice that. And if you still have questions, we'll also have time to reflect. But I think with that, we're just gonna.
One other comment.
Yeah. Okay, one other.
It's okay, sorry, I'll be quick. I was just along those lines of needs. I mean, it was funny when I was going through the persona and I was thinking about somebody I know intimately and how they relate to some of the content that we just saw, which is in a lot of ways a caricature of how that age group behaves. And I was thinking about her and how you start to, I was wondering in your own design research, separate, you know, the idea that they're not a homogeneous population, no one really is, and how do you separate a sort of trend in a perceived need, like the need to perform, with which was present in a lot of the materials we saw, with like maybe a more basic human need to just be seen or to be understood, and not then create a product or a solution that says, oh, okay, great. Seems like everybody really wants to get out there and act like a goofball and you know, share everything.
Yeah, the thing that comes to mind there is actually context. Context really matters, and so the next thing we're gonna share with you actually is a point about context, but it's one of the reasons that we go in context to observe people, and so like what we might discover is actually the need to be seen only shows up in some contexts, whereas there's another context where, like, you know, maybe they're more willing to be vulnerable, right? And like, what are the conditions that create those two different modes of behavior? I mean, the truth is, like, with personas, we'll often talk about how, you know, there's not just like types, like you're a type and you're only that type, and you're a type and you're only that type, but actually it's more like modes, like, and you might shift in and out of different modes depending on the context. And so just as like an example from the Beyond 12 piece, right? Like, we know that students, when they first come to the app, they're in a mode of swipe, swipe, tap, tap, where they're really just like looking to kind of like quickly get inspired and figure out like what's going on, and that the video is a really great way to engage them, but they can also be in a mode where like then they need to get it done, right? And like when they need to get it done, there's a whole different way that you design for that mode, right? So that's when we had the kind of to-do lists and the kind of like urgency around deadlines. So just kind of like there are different ways to meet those different modes.
I also want to add to that normally when we start the process, you're doing equal parts understanding the user you're designing for, but also understanding what is your design challenge, what are you trying to accomplish, because that frame will make it a lot easier for you to see needs that aren't relevant to you, and then you can leave them out.
Okay. Super quickly, this won't be an activity, but it is something I want to share with you because it's another great tool for you all to have in your toolbox. Shadowing a student. So I keep mentioning this, like we go in context or we go into the field. Like, what do I mean by that? And I literally mean we, depending on the challenge and whatever the relevant context is that we're designing for, we show up. We show up in that context and follow students around, right? So like with Beyond 12, we would like hang out with them at their home. We like followed them around on campus, not just when they were in classes, but between classes when they were socializing with friends. We call it shadowing. It's like, again, it's anthropology, but it's a really valuable way to build empathy. So I just want to give you like a kind of a visceral example of what shadowing feels like from some work we did. So School Retool is actually a program that we developed in collaboration with that IDEO developed in collaboration with the Stanford D School and the Hewlett Foundation, and it's a cohort program for school leaders who are trying to create change in their schools, right? And you know, the way to kind of, again, because education's so rigorous and best practice based, sometimes we think to create change, you need to make a huge strategic plan and then take many years to very deliberately roll it out. And what we were trying to do with School Retool is say, actually, how can you use some of the practices of design that you're actually learning here and think about more incremental ways to make change? Like, how do you quickly learn what user needs are and then like prototype them quickly to figure out
like ultimately where you might head. And so we, as part of this school retool cohort, we also launched a national challenge, and we got principals from all 50 states, about 1,500 principals, to engage in, like on leap day or leap year, to like engage in shadowing a student. And the experience was pretty, like the Twitter was blowing up. It was so amazing to see like all these principals who like thought they knew their students, like get their minds completely blown. And so we've now started to do this annually. We just did another one this spring, but here's just kind of a feeling for what happened.
High school students and parents sometimes say principals and teachers don't quite understand what it's like to be a student these days. It turns out there's an effort to change that. Some 1,300 principals recently took a day off from their usual role and instead followed one of their students for a day. The approach came from two groups outside the traditional field of public education: the design school at Stanford University, and IDEO, a design company based in Palo Alto, California. Special correspondent John Tulenko of Education Week followed one principal through the first ever National Shadow a Student Day challenge. It's part of our weekly education series on making the grade.
Today, Caryn is following a 9th grader,
Wait for me, Alan.
Alan Garcia.
I first met him because he came to my office and said he wanted to talk about his schedule for next year. He's in a lot of remedial classes, and he wanted to be changed out of those classes. So I really want to know what makes him feel that way.
She hopes to find out, not just by observing Alan's classes, but by fully participating in his entire day, which started at 7:35 with a boost of physical education.
This is the class that I was most nervous about, because I don't run.
Her stamina would be put to the test by what comes next. 7 more 50-minute periods, starting with Learning Center for one-on-one help.
Right, yeah, right, because you have to explain.
Followed by Alan's usual 2-hour double math class. Then, barely pausing for a bite.
Thank you.
Before jumping into the second half of the day. 4 back-to-back classes. Literacy, computers, English, and freshman seminar, until the 3 p.m. dismissal bell marks the finish line.
He, was placed in certain classes because of his test scores, but I don't know if he necessarily needs to be in that level. What did you get?
I got Y is...
He was getting things and teaching them to me.
Yeah, you got it.
Alan helped me.
Really?
Yes. I think Alan represents someone who is very representative of our school. Middle of the road kid who, when challenged, can reach very high expectations. And I think, maybe keeping him at a certain level might hinder his opportunity to do that. So I would like to see more opportunities given to students, and maybe we need to rethink the way that we place students, not based on test scores.
How else had her views changed? To find out, we asked Caryn to grade East Leiden High School on some key measures, both before and after her shadow day. Keep in mind her view was limited to just Alan's classes. We began with this statement.
In this school, students learn actively, creating, questioning, discovering. Your grade yesterday was a B.
Mm-hmm.
Today?
I would say a C-.
Her scores also went down for student engagement, from B to C+.
You said the blue
And relevance.
and the purple.
How often teachers drew a clear connection between students' work and the outside world. That dropped from a C to a D.
That was fun. Do we have to do it again? The point is to know what the students are thinking and wanting, and start with them.
In Franklin Park, Illinois, I'm John Tulenko of Education Week, reporting for the PBS NewsHour.
Thanks for bearing with a 3-minute video. But I think that gives you like a pretty good feel for what shadowing's about. And obviously we're not going to be able to shadow a student now, but I wanted to share that with you because it's such a valuable tool. And once you do it, you might want to like do it for like a few students. And so what we've done is we've actually given you a worksheet that basically takes like kind of all the tools that we gave the shadow a student challenge and a little bit more on a worksheet so that you can take this kind of tool back to your institution or your organization and give it a try. You might enlist some others to kind of do it with you. And so these are some things to consider when you're shadowing a student. So, you know, pick the day. How do you choose a student? How do you even reach out to them and ask them what you want to do? Basically, you want to step in their shoes for a day. You're actually not there to observe their classes. You're there to observe them and how they show up. And also, like as I mentioned, the transitions matter as much, if not more, than sometimes what's happening in class. And so as much as possible, if you can meet them at home and commute with them and then meet them after school and sort of see what happens after school as well, you'll get an even fuller picture. So we've just kind of given you like a little overview of how to think about it and how to show up and how to kind of bring an open mind and you know, even how to dress, because if you're going to shadow a student, you want them to feel comfortable, so you don't want to show up wearing your suit. You want to kind of dress casual like them. And then also some things to do once you've kind of gone through that activity, which is kind of very similar to the reflection that we did after the personas activity, but you know, here's some conversation starters. You might have like a before and after interview with them to kind of, you know, get some follow-up questions like, oh, I noticed that you did this, like, why did you do that? Or, you know, have a discussion with them after, you know, some notes on how to observe, what to be looking for, and then reflecting on like what did you notice and what did that make you realize about what the student needs or what they value, and what ideas does that start to give you? So it's just like a little overview. We're not gonna do this now, but what we want to do is show you what happens next, which is how do you go from kind of doing these shadow experiences, turning them into personas, and then how do you design based on those? So I'm going to move on to the design piece unless there's any questions on shadowing. All right. So the second mindset, if the first mindset's all about empathy, it feels like everyone kind of got a good empathy for what empathy is all about. The second most important mindset of a designer is bias to action, right? So you don't just like stay in learning mode forever, right? We're not researchers for the sake of research, we're researched for the sake of design. And so it's all about what do you then do with that design, and how do you not just also stay in design forever, but how do you then get really quickly to prototyping, right? So like what Isabela showed with the My Coach app, right? We learned so quickly when we started prototyping those videos that it informed so much like where we ended up that, you know, you want to get there as quickly as possible so you aren't wasting resources. So another quick video, this one's like 30 seconds, but just sort of like a reminder. This is actually part of the school retool piece, but just a little, I'll just play it. Just a little illustration of what that bias to action mindset is. And it's like really easy to go, oh, yes, bias to action, and nod your head and say, I get it. But, you know, in education, there's kind of a tendency to overthink things like for good and sometimes for bad. And so, you know, rather than talking about what you do about that trash that's lying there, like do something about it, right? Like, and think about like, what could you try quickly that's gonna help inform that conversation the next time you have it. So we're gonna move into framing opportunities. And so what does this mean? How do we go from design to, from insights to design? So this is like one of my favorite quotes. It's actually from one of the founders of IDEO, Bill Moggridge. Bill said, you know, you got to make sure you're designing the right thing. Then you got to make sure, then you got to make sure you're designing the thing right. So what does that mean? Basically, it means that actually this single most important act that you do as a designer is design the question. And maybe that seems silly, but actually designing the right question, making it just the right size, making sure it's really based on a user need that matters, is going to ensure that you aren't, you're designing the thing that doesn't matter. I'll give you an example from like the hotel industry. Like, you know, IDEO works across industries and sectors. We've like in our lives at IDEO have worked in other industries as well. So in hospitality, right? Like I can't tell you like we've worked with a lot of hotels, and like the hotel chain will come to you and they'll say, we really want to redesign the lobby experience. And you're like, okay, like what are you hoping to gain from that? And I don't know, but like, you know, the lobby is the first impression we make, and it's where all the service happens, and the lobby, it's all about the lobby. And we're like, okay. And then you go out in the field and you start talking to guests, and like it's like especially business travelers, and like what's the first thing you learn? Like, you know, I want to spend no time in the lobby. When I check into the hotel, I want to like get to my room as quickly as humanly possible. Like, I do not want to be in the lobby. And so, like, if you design based on that assumption, right? Like, you know, okay, like you know, let's just spend like large, like millions of dollars redesigning the lobby. It'll actually be for naught because it's not meeting a user need. Same thing. Sorry to pick on badging, but you know, there's some things that badging does really well, but just because you have a solution doesn't mean it's the right solution or that solution meets a need, right? So in my coach, it turned out that GIFs were a far better thing than like badging, right? So you really got to challenge your assumptions here, and you really have to make sure that you're designing based on the right user need. So, framing the opportunity. Do you want to talk a little bit about this activity?
Yes. Okay. Absolutely. So now what we're going to do is we're going to try to use this bias to mindset. We're going to try to use this mindset to actually make a plan to move forward. So what we're going to ask you to do is find the worksheet that says opportunity framing at the top. And we're going to ask you to think about an area that you might want to better engage students in learning, or better engage students, period. So remember the person that you just thought about that was relevant in your own life? Now, we're going to ask you to think about an experience you'd like to improve for them. And to do so first by just thinking about yourself. So think about you. What are your goals for this student or for this child? And what are you trying to improve for them? And then what are the challenges in doing so? And then what we're going to ask you to do is flip that. So sort of take off that mindset and think about it from the student's perspective and try to understand what those student needs are and what their challenges might be. Are there any questions about that before we get started? Does anyone have one right off the top of their head that they want to share just to get others started? What is an experience or a challenge that you might want to redesign? Yeah.
I'm a math teacher, so I'm trying to think of new homework paradigms.
Perfect. That's amazing. Yeah, so what you want to do is think about that math homework and start with what are your goals for the math homework that you're sending home, and what are the challenges with how it's currently working? And then we're going to flip it and think about what do students need from that, and what are the challenges that students have? Yeah.
I'm organizing or hosting a robotic program for middle schoolers, and my concern is I will have a group that have very different level of coding skills, and how do I make that engaging at different levels?
These are perfect. Both of those, I think this is going to be quite easy because there's a lot of excellent challenges in the room. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you 5 minutes to go ahead and start jotting these things down. Those are 2 excellent examples, but we can't wait to hear more. By way of debriefing, what I would like to know really quickly is just what did you notice what was the major pivot when you reframed something from thinking about it from your point of view, what your goals were, from the students' needs for the same challenge? So any reflections just on that pivot?
Confess I started down the pathway of doing it from my own perspective, and it took me, like, I actually got a little bit written down and then had to stop and back up and be like, no, wait. So I'm just sort of saying, I think we're all kind of stuck in that mindset.
Awareness is the first step.
What else?
Oh, I think instead of looking from my perspective again, is build empathy and really looking at. So for example, I'm thinking how to motivate them, and looking from their need is what is their need? Why do they want to be here? And be less, I would say, generic. Thinking that and not use, and it forced me to use a growth mindset.
Okay, so when I'm designing like a lesson or some kind of plan for the classroom, my goals are very singular. Like I want to increase literacy rates in general in my classroom. However, the needs of my students are very nuanced, and at my table that seems to be the same case, right? Like we're trying to push one initiative while meeting several different types of needs and several different learners, abilities or learning preferences or something like that. So you have to keep a lot of different things in mind to make it work.
Totally.
I wanted to follow up on something that the table over on the far end said about empathy. When you kind of put yourself into that young person's shoes, so to speak, it's easier to see it from their point. I think one of the things that we settled on, so we sort of created a scenario around a young person graduating from college and taking that first big jump into the world of adulthood and how scary that is for them, and how, as whether you're an advisor or a parent or what have you, you want to kind of like nag to make sure that everything goes well for them so they're successful and happy. But really what they need to do is own it, right? It's their life, and they need to feel that sense of agency and ownership. And I think that empathy allowed us to make that switch from they should do this, they should, to, well, wait, it's their life, they need to figure it out. And the caring adult is just there for support.
Amazing. Yeah, that's beautiful.
I love hearing that.
Yeah, I think that this echoes everything that you guys just said, which is when our challenges and our goals were like these kind of like bigger sort of, like communicate the effectiveness of this thing, or and then when we got into the students, it became all around their social and emotional needs and development, and it became like totally personalized and way more about their feelings and kind of how they would feel at the end of something, which is it was actually like almost like a different category of thought. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. Great. Those are profound insights. Those pivots were so wonderful to hear. And now we want to go a little bit further, and we want to continue that thread, thinking about the challenge that you identified, and we want to flip that further into a design opportunity. And we use this language of how might we to find the opportunity in the challenge. So how might we is, you probably noticed when we were sharing the breadth of our work, we shared a lot of how might we statements. Like how might we redesign the juvenile incarceration experience? How might we design a school system that is excellent, scalable, and affordable? And there's a really intentional reason that we use those three words, how might we? And they're listed, how to write a good how might we is actually listed on the bottom of the worksheet. And the reason is you want to be specific, you want to be optimistic about it, you want to have multiple answers that could possibly be correct, and no better one that sort of the solution's not emerging through the question. And so the art of a good how might we, actually it can take us weeks and weeks to frame up a good how might we, because what it does is it structures all the future work. A good how might we question is your design brief. And so what we're going to ask you to do now is actually do that. Flip your challenge into a how might we phrase, and you're going to start by how might we followed by some sort of an action verb. So how might we engage? How might we design? How might we transform? You get it from there, and then fill it in with the student need that you're designing for, and then the outcome that you're hoping for. You have 2 minutes.
All right, so we're going to shift gears so that you guys have a chance to go through the last, most important step of the process before you all head out. Your heroes for hanging in there for the last session today. All right, so the next step is MVP. Who knows what MVP means? All right, good. MVP, for those of you who don't know what it means minimum viable product. It's a product development term While it's a product development term for building great digital products, I think it's really important to know that it's not just relevant for something that's digital. And also, when you say minimum viable product to often folks in education, they're like, wait, no, but we can't sacrifice anything because, you know, all of the content's important. And actually, this isn't about like minimum because we're making sacrifices. It's actually about like maximizing the impact for like minimum investment. So this is really a lesson in, you know, we can have grand ambitions to, you know, and great ideas for how we might solve that question that's in front of us. But the truth is, like, again, the lesson that we learned from that prototype is we aren't sure that first idea that we come up with is going to be right until you test it. And so what this is actually enabling you to do is really quickly learn whether some of your assumptions about what you're going to design to solve that how might we question are correct, and then use those to actually improve what that idea is later on down the line. So it's a really, really important step in the process, and it's something that's going to ensure that whatever your product, your experience, your lesson, whatever it is you're creating is going to have maximum impact and really meet that student need. So again, I mentioned that it's not just relevant for building a digital product. So for anyone who's in tech, you are like super familiar with this because it's the way that you work and live. But I thought it'd be fun to give you an example of this kind of thinking in something that was like totally like the furthest thing from tech I can imagine. So this is a story from a pretty famous city planner in New York. And basically, there was this challenge that they were having in New York where Times Square was basically the perfect storm of traffic, crowded, like, you know, tourists everywhere, pedestrians, and of course, like, because it's also like fascinating and there's like lights everywhere, the tourists are just like, wow, and like wandering into the middle of the traffic, and like they were having a huge issue with like accidents, both cars and pedestrian accidents. And not only that, but because of that was this like packed with all these people, it was also causing a lot of congestion because it was in the middle of the city, like that had ramifications like across the island of Manhattan. So Times Square was really like this epicenter of kind of a problem for New York. And so what this city planner did was hypothesize, gosh, I mean, there's just so much going on. Like, what if we could just like eliminate one of the factors? What would happen? And so what they did was they tried something, a crazy experiment with very little notice to like the police force. What they did was, you know, she's like, what if we could just divert traffic? What if there was no traffic in Times Square? Maybe that would both improve traffic and improve, you know, and reduce the number of accidents, right? So she's like, okay, let's see, what are we gonna do? She just blocked off the streets. She's like, oh, but maybe we could put some like chairs in the middle of the streets too to just sort of, you know, get the point across. And so, you know, they went and like bought up lawn chairs in like all of the Walmarts that they could find, and like basically just like took over Times Square for a day with lawn chairs. And what they learned in this process was actually pretty profound. Not only did it dramatically reduce traffic across the city, obviously reduce the number of accidents, but it had sort of this like bonus side benefit where all of a sudden now pedestrians, because they didn't feel like they were in this sort of like high traffic frenetic zone, they stayed longer. And they actually saw an uptick in the small businesses that were located in Times Square. It was actually good for the like local economy as well. And so this was such a successful experiment that they actually instituted it. Oops. So when you go to Times Square during the summers, you'll actually see the more formal version of this. And what they've done is they've like painted the street to indicate what are the kind of like non-car zones and to kind of give people the sense that it's okay to step into the street. They've obviously blocked the street off, and they've also installed like proper furniture. And so summers in Times Square look a lot more like this, and they got to that by first testing an MVP. So, do you want to talk a little about our next activity? So we want to give you the opportunity to take that how might we question and imagine an experiment that you might do to kind of start testing an assumption. So here.
Great. So essentially, it's not a minimum viable product. It's a maximum value prototype. Yeah. So think about what you could do to start testing solutions to your how might we question. So think about the design challenge that you just came up with, and then what we're going to ask you to do when you walk out of here today is take this worksheet with you and start coming up with some ideas for experiments that you might be able to run to quickly validate if your idea is working or not.
Maybe because I just realized somehow we went from having 20 minutes to 3. I wonder if we could just do this all together, just so that everyone has a sense of sort of how this feels. So maybe we could just like have someone volunteer with like a how might we question, and then we can all sort of imagine together what an experiment could be for how you could test an idea that gets toward that.
Who's got a nice, short, simple how might we question?
Okay.
Don't worry, there's no judgment, don't caveat.
All right, how might we activate students' self-discovery to define their own path for the future? And we're thinking about either high school or college career college counseling.
How might we activate students' self-discovery to
define their own path for their future?
Okay.
And then what level student are you talking about?
Let's say high school student. Trying to figure out what they're doing after high school. So the counseling process in a high school setting.
Okay, cool. I love it. Actually, is reminiscent of like another couple how might we's I heard at this table as well. So, can we do like a quick brainstorm? This is gonna break your microphone. This is gonna absolutely because okay, we're gonna have really rapid though, so you're gonna have to run. Okay, so who can think of a way that we might tackle that that's a really tangible experiment that could be run like tomorrow at the school?
We could campaign in the cafeteria or something about student awareness to gauge, like to first assess what students know about it, and then based on their responses, maybe even a survey or something, we can then figure out where to go.
Discovery to define their own path for the future.
So I was going to say something, well, the first step should be assessment as to what students already know. And something simple, you should just grab 10 high school students and tell them like, okay, so what do you naturally do already? Like what would they Google, who would they think they should be contacting? Kind of know like what level they're at and see how you can come in and help further their
Does anyone have any other ideas? I like these ideas, but I noticed that don't forget, you've already shadowed students, you've already developed personas, you've always spent a lot of time identifying your question. You guys are staying in learning mode, maybe a little too long. Like, what's something that you could try?
You could do a journaling competition, asking students to journal daily for 2 weeks, and then at the end offer some kind of incentive.
I love that.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's an MVP.
Yep.
It's working.
Any other ideas?
Yeah, I would kind of combine that cafeteria idea and the latter one that they would pick few students and they would be said that you will make Snapchat interviews about the other kids in the cafeteria.
Love it.
And ask what you will become when you grow up.
I love it.
And the second question is that if they don't know, where would you find out what you will become when you grow up?
Bonus points for integrating the design principles from the session this morning. Yes, I love that. And also that's like a super great trick to like get students to be more vulnerable. Instead of asking them directly what they need, have them ask each other. You get way more authentic answers. So I love that.
Yeah, you could quickly like choose a group of students, like 20 students, and hook them up with alumni that are already in the world as like a way of piloting a program that disintermediated the college counselor and kind of brought them into, to see that through a different lens.
I love that. And I'm going to ask everyone if we could build on that idea to make it even smaller and actionable tomorrow, right? So like matching to alumni, I think is a great idea. And it sounds like it might take a lot of time. Like what could be something that could help you test that idea like in the next week. Okay, wrapping up. So just to like answer my own question, you could potentially invite a handful of recent graduates back to the school for pizza and just like see what questions students ask them, right? So you could just kind of do it instead of matching and sort of learn about what that matching process, what form that matching process might take. So that was the sort of like hyper fast MVP, although appropriately enough, that's what MVPs are supposed to be. Hopefully that gives you a taste of the design process. And we do hope that you take the time to take your How Might We's to that next stage. So thank you for spending the time with us to kind of learn a little about digital native mindsets, get your empathy on, and help translate that to design. Just a reminder, this process doesn't end, right? So it's iterative. So you're going to keep, this whole thing will just kind of keep revolving. Like once you have an idea, you're going to test it, you'll learn, and it'll keep iterating. So we hope that you take the first step. We've given you an action plan so you can kind of plan how you might bring some of these tools back to your organization or institution. Obviously, we don't have time for reflection or questions, but we're here if you have any. And mostly, just remember, you all are UX designers. Go forth and design.
Thanks, everyone.
Well done.